The information in this podcast is for general informational and educational purposes only. Whilst we love unpacking psychology research and evidence-based insights to support well-being, this podcast is not a substitute for personal mental health care or therapy with a qualified practitioner. Nothing we say should be taken as individualised advice. If anything you hear brings up concerns for you, we strongly encourage you to speak with your GP, psychologist, or another qualified health professional. You deserve support that's tailored to you. Welcome to This Might Help, where psychology research meets real life. I'm Dr. Lauren Rossetti. I'm an Australian psychologist and a researcher. And if you've listened to the podcast before, you'll know there's normally two of us behind the mic. Kira is away at the moment, and so you have me for a solo episode today. And it's officially winter in Australia, and this week's topic was inspired by a chat I had with a friend recently who said this year they are romanticising winter, which I loved. They're, embracing the cold, they're planning winter activities, they're trying to make the best out of the cold months. And that got me inspired to do an episode about how we can look after our well-being in winter, because for a lot of us, and definitely for me, but maybe also for you as well, this is a time when we're feeling a big drop in motivation. We might be feeling a drop in our well-being, we're less social, and we might also feel a bit more moody and a bit more easily irritated by things. It's also just getting dark by the time you leave work, and it feels pretty grim in winter, especially in Melbourne. And you might find yourself doing things like cancelling plans, even when you made the plans yourself. You might be feeling super tired. It's been really cold and rainy these past few weeks and days in Melbourne, and we're definitely feeling the effects of winter, even though winter's technically only just started. So today we're going to cover what's happening in your brain and body during winter, why this makes us feel worse, and what we can actually do to help. With what we can do to help, it's also not just what helps, but it's how we can actually feel more motivated or more inspired to do those things, because a lot of us know what we should be doing, but it feels very hard to actually do those things when it's 5 degrees and you're in bed under the blanket, and who possibly wants to get out of bed then? We can't also all be living our best lives on a European holiday in winter. So how do we actually make things not just bearable in the colder months, but actually feel good? But before we get into it, I'm still going to do my wellbeing win and wellbeing wobble for the week, even though I'm flying solo. So my wellbeing win was that I ticked off a random small admin task that I had been putting off for months on end. When I did it, it ended up only taking, 15 minutes in total, and it was so easy. So I hope that's some inspiration to also tick off the admin thing that's been on your list for months. We spoke about in our episode on overwhelm and becoming, overwhelmed. We talked about the concept of open loops, and those are those things that you have on your list or you haven't ticked off your list, but they're just sitting in the back of your mind as something you really need to get done, or you need to do at some point. And for me, that was definitely this admin task was an open loop. And so I'm happy to say that I've ticked it off the list. So inspiration to close some of your open loops. My wellbeing wobble is that my screen time has been pretty high lately, which maybe for a lot of us we can also relate to in winter. We might see that uptick or increase in our screen time. And that brings us to our topic of winter, and let's get stuck into it. What is biologically and psychologically happening to us in winter that is impacting how we feel? One of the biggest changes that occurs in winter that is impacting our brains and our bodies is the amount of light that we're exposed to. Now, our brains have an internal clock called the circadian rhythm. That's a roughly 24-hour biological cycle in our bodies that's regulating things like sleep and mood and energy and your appetite and hormones. And this internal clock that's going on is set and reset by light, and specifically that light that's entering through our eyes, which is signaling to our brain that it's daytime, it's time to wake up and be alert. But in winter, when the days get shorter, that signal is weaker and it can often arrive later in the morning, which means that our clock or that internal clock can get pushed back, which in research, this is called a phase delay. So we have shorter days, the light signal is less strong, and then we might see that shift in our circadian rhythm. This lack of light in winter has impacts for two kind of really important hormones. The first one of those is melatonin, which is the sleep hormone, and that regulates the timing of our sleep. Melatonin is released in response to darkness, and in winter, when we've got more of that darkness, it may be produced for longer and it might remain elevated further into the morning. And that can make us feel, possibly sleepier or more sluggish. The second hormone is serotonin. That's a mood regulating hormone which is boosted by exposure to sunlight. So when we have less light in winter, we may have lower serotonin activity, and we also then may feel, things like lower mood and lower motivation. So we have this change in light in winter, less exposure to light, which means we might be seeing a longer release of melatonin. We might be feeling more sluggish. It might feel harder to get up in the morning, but also with that lower exposure to light, we may be seeing less serotonin production, which may impact our mood and motivation. So those two processes are, happening in winter. And this pattern that we've seen in winter and we see in, psychology and in clinical settings in winter, when we're feeling more flat or we have lower mood or lower motivation, this was first mentioned by American psychiatrist Norman Rosenthal in the 1980s. And this was when he described seasonal affective disorder, or SAD. And this seasonal affective disorder is a pattern of depression or a type of depression that is linked to changes in seasons. Now, SAD is at the clinical end of the spectrum of these symptoms. So it's affecting around or can affect around 5% of the population. But it also differs a lot by location. So often in darker, colder places, there might be higher rates of SAD. And in those lighter, warmer places or those warmer climates, you may see less frequency of seasonal affective disorder. It's also more common in women than in men, and it tends to first emerge in young adulthood, so kind of somewhere between the teenage years to 30s. Some common things people may notice in seasonal affective disorder are things like low energy and fatigue, especially in the mornings, wanting to sleep more but not necessarily feeling rested, even with that increased sleep. You might see changes in appetite, so particularly increased cravings for carbohydrates. Might be that social withdrawal and cancelling more plans and difficulty concentrating and lower mood, feeling more irritable and feeling more flat. And when these types of symptoms are really persistent and when mood is low, this is when it's really important to reach out to a healthcare professional to discuss these symptoms and to get professional support, especially in the case of seasonal affective disorder. It's also common for people to sit somewhere on that spectrum without necessarily meeting the criteria for seasonal affective disorder. So sometimes this is referred to as subsyndromal SAD, or commonly in kind of everyday conversation, we might call this the winter blues. So these seasonal changes in mood and in energy and appetite and sleep, that can be really common. Which leads us to think about what types of strategies we can actually use to improve our well-being in winter which is just honestly so hard. There's the cruel irony with winter where the things that help the most are often the hardest to do when you feel flat and when the weather is horrible and it's 5 degrees outside and who wants to get out of bed. For these strategies, it's not just what to do, but it's how we can make them feel more appealing when we really don't want to do them in the colder months. There are 4 key areas which often come up when we think about supporting our well-being in winter, which are light, movement, sleep, and social connection. Light is the first area we might think about when we're wanting to increase our well-being and mood in winter. Specifically, exposure to light comes up a lot in the research, and that's because we know in winter we can see that shift in our circadian rhythm, and something called light therapy is often used to reduce that excess melatonin, but also to support the serotonin production and help to reset that internal clock. Formal light therapy is something which usually involves a light box, and someone may sit in front of that for around 30 minutes each morning. That helps to reset the circadian rhythm, and it might be something that's recommended or kind of prescribed in cases of seasonal affective disorder. But even outside of formal light therapy, exposure to light early in the day can help with our circadian rhythm. And so that might look like a morning walk, might look like opening the curtains as soon as you can when waking up so that you're getting that exposure to light. It might also look like sitting near a window in the morning and then trying where you can during the day to have that light exposure. And we know that the days in winter can be shorter and the opportunity for light exposure is less. And so trying to make sure we're maximizing the light we're exposed to can help. And even when it's overcast outside or it's a bit cloudy, there's still a lot of light that your eyes and brain are taking in, which can help with that circadian rhythm. But it also can feel really impossible to get outside in the morning in winter when it's freezing. And so when, it's those days that's just not feeling like an option, then those indoor ways to get light exposure can help, like sitting near the window. And when we do feel like we can do it, even better if we can tackle the cold and get some exposure to the direct natural light outside in the morning, with something like a 5-10 minute walk around the block. And even just being exposed to nature in winter more broadly can help boost our health and well-being. So, trying to rug up and walk through the park or go on an outdoor trip, or even just trying to, still go for that lap around the block at work on your lunch break is really also so important in the winter months, even though understandably it feels a lot harder. But we know from the research that exposure to nature, time outside, those are all things that boost and improve our mood and well-being. And they're the things that can feel a lot harder to do and to get to in the winter months, which might also contribute to where we see that decline or that dip in how we're feeling. And so this is a time when it's even more important to try and get some of that outdoor time. One thing I've been trying to do is to tap a colleague on the shoulder or, message a friend and try and do a walk during my workday outside. Even if it's just 5 minutes, I might, take a meeting on the phone, call someone, and just try and get outside. Sometimes I'll pair it with a nice hot drink like a coffee or a hot chocolate, so I've got something warm in my hands, and that sometimes pushes me over the edge into the motivation to actually do it. Movement, especially outdoor movement, but kind of any movement or exercise at all, is the next strategy we think about when supporting our well-being in winter. With exercise, we know that does a bunch of good things for our mood and for our well-being in general. So it boosts serotonin and endorphins and it reduces cortisol. But the combination of movement outside is where we're seeing that light exposure and the benefits from movement. And that can improve, obviously, our mood, but especially in people who may see those seasonal mood changes. So if you're prone to feeling a bit more flat or low in winter when the days are short, the light is less, and it's really cold, if you're able to get something in like an outdoor walk, that's ticking off two things at once. So it's helping with the light exposure and you're getting the well-being benefits of movement and exercise. Obviously, we know that exercise helps. We get told, again and again that exercise is good for our well-being and our mood, but it still feels so hard to do in winter. It's freezing, you're in bed, you don't want to get up and even go outside for the walk, or you might find yourself cancelling Pilates classes a lot more often in winter than you do in, the summer or the warmer months. And this is where our implementation intentions can be really useful. So implementation intentions are about that if-then planning that helps us increase how likely we are to actually follow through on the intentions that we set. This is particularly helpful when our motivation is very low, which I know for me, but probably for a lot of you as well, it is lower in winter. So rather than saying things like, I'm going to exercise this week, an implementation intention would look like making a specific plan for how you're going to implement things. So that might look like, if it's raining Monday morning and I don't want to go on my morning walk, then I'll do a 20-minute YouTube yoga workout inside. Or if I cancel Pilates, then I'll make sure I go for a 5-minute walk through the park. So it's having those concrete backup plans to remove the in-the-moment decision, especially when in winter, that in-the-moment decision might always be to go on our phones or to head to the couch or to get under the blanket. But we know that those things aren't necessarily going to keep our mood and well-being consistently high. It's still important to maintain that exercise and movement when these times are happening, when it feels really hard. Having those predetermined plans and knowing what we are going to do when things happen, like when it's raining outside, can help us follow through. And we know that we tend to wait until we feel motivated before we act. But we also know that the research tells us that it often works the opposite way, which is that action precedes motivation. So when we act, our motivation then often increases. And to help us feel better able to actually take that first action or step when our motivation is low, we can also try and reduce the friction for that action as much as possible. So what I mean by that is that if you want to go for a walk in the morning, you do want to get that light exposure and that movement early in the day. If you wake up and you have nothing set up, so you don't have the plan, you don't have anything ready, it's going to feel really hard to actually get out of bed and go for that walk, especially when it's freezing and cold. But if we reduce the friction as much as possible, and this might look like putting your shoes by the door, putting clothes out the night before. It might be having, your socks and all of your warm clothes right next to your bed so that you can put them on really quickly, and that helps you actually get out into the cold. These things to help reduce the friction, they are all helping us to take that first step. So it also might look like committing to a really small goal first. I'm just going to go outside and I'm just going to walk for 5 minutes. And if it's so freezing and I decide absolutely not, I still don't want to do it, then that's okay. You've just committed to 5 minutes. Come back inside and try again the next day. But you might often find that by just committing to a really small goal, like 5 minutes, once you get the ball rolling, or once you've again taken that first action, that action boosts motivation, and then it's a flow and effect of increasing the action that follows. So all of these things we will try and do in conjunction. So you might try implementation intentions, you might try reducing the friction for that action, and then that can help us to take the first step. The third area that we think about when we're looking to support our well-being in winter is sleep. and particularly about protecting your sleep routine. One thing that probably a lot of us might want to do in winter is oversleep, but oversleeping can extend the time in darkness, which can impact those delays in the circadian rhythm further. And that might lead to things like waking up feeling a bit groggier or waking up later and having less opportunity for that early morning light exposure. Whereas keeping a consistent wake time is one of the things that we have spoken about in our sleep episode, but which also the research comes back to a lot. So keeping a consistent wake time, including weekends, which is really tricky, but can be really helpful, is one of the most reliable ways to support the circadian rhythm. But getting out of bed in the dark at 7 a.m. can feel physically painful in winter. And some things that can help us, which I also try and do as much as possible when I can, are things like keeping your phone or the alarm across the room or in another room, trying to resist the snooze button. Having something small to look forward to in the first 15 minutes of the morning can also help. So, are you going to listen to a podcast? Are you going to spend some time reading the book that you're really liking? Are you going to do some yoga? Would you wake up and maybe do some stretching in front of the heater? Would you maybe cook or have your favorite breakfast or a hot beverage or something? But trying to choose something that you enjoy so that when you wake up, you're feeling like, okay, now I get to do this thing I like for 15 minutes. That can help us keep that consistent wake time and get us out of bed when in winter it obviously feels really tricky. Social connection is the next area that helps to support our well-being in winter. It's obviously harder in winter, but it's also so important because withdrawal is one of the things that comes up for a lot of people in the colder months. There's often less plans, there's, less going on, there's less of those kind of spontaneous social catch-ups happening, and that can impact our mood if we are feeling more isolated because we're less socially connected. But we also may be feeling flatter or lower in winter because of those biological and psychological changes that we've spoken about. And so if we're already feeling a bit more flat, a bit lower in winter, then we might also feel less interested in planning and seeking out social connections and going to social connections that we already have. So in winter, this might look like really wanting to cancel plans. It might look like not wanting to go to that social event. It may look like skipping this month's book club or run club or date nights because we feel like we really don't want to go or we're really not in the mood. It might also look like reaching out less to friends and family, spending more time on our phones, and spending less time outside, which may also reduce the frequency of those spontaneous social catch-ups with people, or even those small micro kind of social interactions. So a smile with someone walking past or a chat with the barista, those types of things may all reduce. But from a psychology research perspective, we know that we can be notoriously bad at predicting how much we'll actually enjoy things when we're in lower mood states. This is called affective forecasting, which is when we're trying to predict how we'll feel in the future. We often overestimate how bad an experience or something will feel, and we might underestimate how good positive things will feel, especially when we're already feeling lower or we're in that lower mood state. So in winter, we might find that in the moment, we really feel like avoiding social events. But when we do actually go, we get the mood boosting benefits of social connection and shared enjoyment and doing something fun and engaging with others, which then supports our mood. But our ability to predict or know or understand how that is going to feel can be poor, especially when it's in winter and it's cold, we're already feeling flat. We may be less likely to want to go or think, I'm going to go to that thing, but I actually don't think it's going to be that good, or I might not feel that great, or I'm just really feeling not up to it. But when we do take that step to go and engage in those social connections, then we often find we take a lot of benefit for our mood and our well-being from them. So some practical ways to help keep our social calendar looking good in winter are to do things like lock plans in advance rather than leaving things open-ended. So, if you've got that movie date booked in with a friend and you've got tickets, or you've got something planned with your family, or you're going to this event and you've told people about it, those locked in plans mean that you're less likely to kind of cancel them at the last minute or not go. Also, having lower effort options for those really hard days when you feel like you really don't want to go outside, you're not up to the big social event. Some lower level options to maintain that social connection can be really helpful. So it might be a phone call with a friend. It might be a short coffee walk. It might be 45 minutes with that person that you need to catch up with, rather than a whole dinner out or a whole night out. And those small little things that you can have in your bank to keep your social connections going can be helpful when you feel like you are not feeling up to the big, extravagant social plans that you might have in those warmer months. And also, like my friend said, which inspired this episode, is to try romanticising winter. So is there a way that you can implement fun and excitement? If you can, try winter activities or start your own type of winter traditions. One of mine is the hot chocolates from Pitta Pippo. If you're in Melbourne, you'll know what I mean, but I've made a winter tradition of catching up with friends and going out and getting one of those. But it's things like, movie nights with friends, or having a baking day at home, or rugging up and going for those winter walks, but with a group of people. It can be things like games nights, and the list is endless, but try scheduling ways to make winter feel more special. There's actually some discussion in psychology research about how people in those really cold climates, like in the Nordic countries, they can thrive in the winter months because of the culture and the mindset around positive and enjoyable parts of the cold. We can also try and help our brains focus on some of those good parts of winter so that we can shift into the winter thriving rather than the really grim winter feels. And one more thing to touch on in this episode is that our motivation and our energy, they're just going to feel different across the year, and that's really okay. There can be, a lot of pressure to maintain exactly the same output and pace the whole year round, to feel like something is wrong if you can't keep up that pace. But we know that our bodies and our brains, they're feeling the seasonal effect. There are changes that are happening, and things do really slow down in winter. And the goal isn't to try to completely change yourself into feeling exactly like you do in the summer. It's more to protect those core routines, to try to help prevent slipping into withdrawal. It's trying to keep our mood and our well-being as positive as we can, whilst making sure we're also being kind to ourselves and understanding that this time in these months, it may look like it involves more rest. It may look like it involves a slower pace, and that's really okay. It's making sure that when we are feeling low, or we're starting to notice those changes in our well-being, that we're thinking about those small ways that we can really help to boost our mood where we can. Well, thank you for listening. And as always, if you need any extra support, there are helplines in the show notes. There are also the resources and the references in there from this episode. We're on socials at This Might Help Podcast. And if you're listening on Spotify or on Apple Podcasts, then don't forget that the video version is also on YouTube. And I'll catch you next time. Bye. This podcast was recorded on Wurundjeri land. We acknowledge and pay our respects to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples as the traditional custodians of this country. We honour their knowledge and resilience and the ongoing impacts of colonisation on well-being.